Doreen Ebert. Doreen Ebert, born on November 29, 1952, in California, came from a large family with 5 children. She was known for her kindness, positivity, and her desire to help others. This desire led her to pursue a career in physiotherapy after college. Moving to San Francisco, Doreen began working in her chosen field, but she also had a dream of building her own large family. At the age of 24, Doreen met Michael Dennis, a man who would later become her husband. The couple quickly connected, sharing similar values and aspirations, and soon they were married. Together, they started their own family, a dream Doreen had long cherished. However, their life took an unimaginable turn on Halloween night, when a simple evening at home would lead to a horrifying and tragic event. Michael Dennis worked at a factory near Doreen's clinic, and their relationship quickly blossomed, leading to marriage. In 1976, they welcomed their son, Paul, into the world. However, as time passed, the joy of parenthood began to strain their marriage. Within a year of Paul's birth, Doreen and Michael made the difficult decision to divorce. Their son, Paul, stayed with Doreen, but Michael maintained a regular presence in his life through visits. Despite the divorce, Doreen and Michael kept their relationship amicable, and she continued to move forward with her life. A year later, Doreen met a man named Charles, and they began dating. The couple soon married and moved to San Jose, where they settled in a peaceful residential neighborhood. In 1979, Doreen and Charles welcomed a daughter, Diana, further fulfilling their dream of a growing family. Like Doreen, Charles also envisioned a large, happy family, and their new life seemed promising. But little did they know, their world would soon be turned upside down by a tragedy that no one could have anticipated. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Charles embraced Doreen's son, Paul, as his own, and the arrival of their daughter, Diana, brought them immense joy. However, in February of 1980, their world shattered when tragedy struck. Paul, just 4 years old, climbed over the fence surrounding their pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, noticed too late. She rushed to pull her son from the pool and called for an ambulance. Paul was quickly transported to the hospital, where doctors connected him to a life support machine. Despite their best efforts, after 10 agonizing days, the doctors concluded that there was no chance of survival. The decision was made to disconnect him from life support. Doreen, utterly devastated, could not stop blaming herself for the accident, even though the police investigation cleared her of any wrongdoing. The loss of her son tore her apart, and she was left with a deep, unshakable sense of grief and guilt. Despite the lingering sadness from the loss of her son, Doreen found solace in her daughter Diana, who helped her through the grief. For years after the tragedy, there was finally a glimmer of hope for the family. Doreen and Charles had been trying for years to have another child, but 2 pregnancies had ended in miscarriage. However, this time, Doreen's pregnancy progressed well, and the couple eagerly awaited the arrival of a baby boy, due in early November. As Halloween approached, the family decided to participate in the festive activities. The neighborhood was alive with decorations, children running from house to house, and families enjoying the spirit of the season. Diana, now 4 years old, was especially excited about trick-or-treating. Despite being 9 months pregnant, Doreen couldn't say no to her daughter's enthusiasm and joined her for a night of Halloween fun. Charles stayed home, passing out candy to the neighborhood kids. Mother and daughter returned home shortly before 9 p.m., full of laughter and candy bags in hand. Little did they know, their evening would take a shocking and horrifying turn. Charles told his wife that they were running low on candy, so he planned to head to the nearest store to restock, not wanting to disappoint the neighborhood children. He left the house at around 8:50 p.m. and returned 15 minutes later. As he approached the house, he noticed the front door was slightly open, which seemed unusual. What he found inside, however, was a true nightmare. Upon entering, he saw his wife lying on the floor in the hallway, surrounded by a large amount of blood. Doreen appeared lifeless, prompting Charles to immediately call 911. As he moved further into the house, he found the body of their unborn child in the living room. In shock and disbelief, he struggled to process what he was seeing. At one point, he briefly wondered if Doreen had suffered a miscarriage, but he soon realized the situation was far worse. Next to the child, he saw a human hand. Charles immediately realized the hand belonged to Doreen. Understanding that someone had attacked his family, he began searching for his daughter, fearing she might also be in danger. The house was covered in blood, and in his frantic search, Charles even slipped and fell while rushing through the rooms. Thankfully, he found his daughter alive, hiding behind the sofa in the living room. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics detected a faint pulse in Doreen and quickly rushed her to the hospital. Sadly, they were unable to save her, and she passed away en route. The unborn child also did not survive. In addition to being removed from Doreen's womb, the baby had suffered multiple blows. Medical experts later determined that Doreen had been repeatedly struck with a long, sharp object, possibly a sword or machete. Meanwhile, the police investigated the house, which resembled a scene from a horrific horror movie. Later, several officers sought psychological help, as even they couldn't cope with what they had witnessed. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. Investigators examined the entire house but didn't find the perpetrator or any clues. Outside the house, police saw bloody footprints on the sidewalk. They stopped in the middle of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had gotten into a car at that spot. Soon, as Charles stated, they never owned such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory, and police tried to talk to Diana. The girl was in complete shock, but she was the sole witness to what happened, and potentially could help identify the assailant. Diana told them that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. Doreen went to answer, and saw a man in a wolf mask holding a long blade. He told her, "I'm going to kill you now." After that, the woman screamed at her daughter to run out of the house, and the girl hid behind the sofa. Diana couldn't recall what happened next to the moment when her father found her. She also couldn't help the police identify the attacker, as he was wearing a wolf mask. Initially, investigators considered the victim's husband as a suspect. They found it suspicious how his trip to the store coincided with the arrival of the killer, as Doreen was attacked just minutes after her husband left home. When Charles returned, he stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Police didn't rule out the possibility that he might have done this intentionally to have an excuse for the blood on his clothes. However, detectives quickly found several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes clearly didn't match those that left bloody footprints on the street. Secondly, the killer likely got into a car parked on the road in front of the house. But there were no blood traces found in Charles's vehicle, nor a different pair of shoes. Police went to the store Charles visited and spoke to the staff member. He confirmed that Charles did buy candies from him that evening, indicating he didn't have time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store also supported this alibi, so detectives temporarily stopped considering him the prime suspect and asked Charles if he had anyone in mind who might wish harm to his family. And the men immediately pointed to Doreen's ex-husband, Michael. According to Charles initially, Michael maintained a normal relationship with his ex-wife. But everything changed after the death of their son, who drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen. Believing she deliberately killed the boy to cut all connections, he even filed a civil lawsuit against her, seeking to hold her responsible for the child's death, but lost the case. Even during the time when Michael and Doreen were still married, he occasionally behaved quite strangely. After the birth of their son, he often fell into depression, distancing himself from both his wife and child. Doreen believed all of this somehow connected to his childhood traumas. Michael had hearing problems from an early age, requiring him to constantly wear a bulky hearing aid. In those days, it was a rather large device, and because of it, other children constantly teased Michael. All of this led to the man growing up introverted, practically having no friends, and avoiding interaction with women. Despite seemingly leaving these issues behind after meeting Doreen, Michael couldn't shake off his old problems completely. This became one of the main reasons for the couple's decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began harboring resentment and animosity towards her, especially disliking the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings intensified after Paul's death, and he started genuinely hating his ex-wife. Michael also lost his job where he had spent most of his adult life. This factor also had some negative effect on him. After hearing all of this, the detectives decided to go to the man's house and talk to him. Charles's account was clearly insufficient to make Michael the prime suspect, but since he lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house, they decided to pay him a visit right away. Officers arrived at his home around midnight and saw the pickup truck parked near the garage. They shined a flashlight inside and saw something resembling blood on the steering wheel and keys. Afterward, they knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The lights were on, and officers could hear water running inside the house, leading them to suspect that the man might be disposing of evidence or cleaning blood-stained clothes. So they continued knocking. Michael eventually opened the door. He remained calm, even after being informed about his ex-wife's murder. The man answered all their questions nonchalantly and allowed the officers inside without a warrant. According to him, he went to the store during the day, returned home, and hadn't left since. Michael even agreed to sign voluntary consent papers to allow a search of his house. As he reached for the pen to sign, investigators noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael claimed he accidentally cut himself earlier while carving a pumpkin for Halloween. However, the police doubted his words. The wound was visibly fresh, and blood was still oozing from it. Meanwhile, a few officers started searching his house. Michael went upstairs with one of them since they asked him to show his ID. When they entered his bedroom, Michael reached for the bed headboard, but the officer immediately told him to step aside. His actions seemed suspicious. Why would he keep his documents behind the bed? When the officer approached, he saw a holster hanging on the bed headboard with a loaded gun inside. He took the weapon and led Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, his colleagues discovered blood droplets on the floor, leading them to a washing machine in the garage and a pile of clothes with bloodstains. This was sufficient for an arrest, and they took the man into custody. Afterward, detectives, along with forensic experts, scrutinized the house more thoroughly, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. The analysis of the blood would take a few days, and meanwhile the police found some new gruesome discoveries. At first, they uncovered an empty box for a machete with an 18-inch blade. Medical experts confirmed that this model perfectly matched the wounds on Doreen's body. Secondly, Michael had 2 makeshift coffins in his house, leading detectives to suspect they were intended for Doreen and her husband. Additionally, the police found body bags typically used by medical staff. Considering Michael had no association with these items, it raised significant concerns. Putting all these pieces together, the police went to the judge to request a warrant for the suspect's arrest for an extended period. Without it, they could only detain him for a limited time. However, the judge deemed the evidence too circumstantial. As a result, Michael had to be released, and the man walked free. Nevertheless, 3 days later, the detectives got the answer from the lab. Experts found 2 types of blood at the crime scene, belonging to different individuals. Blood type analysis revealed that the majority of it shared the same blood type as Doreen, with a small amount matching Michael's. Apparently, the man injured himself during the attack on his ex-wife. This time, the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant, and Michael was officially charged with the murder of his ex-wife and her unborn child. Soon, detectives found another piece of evidence linking him to the crime. Speaking with Michael's acquaintances, they learned he owned the exact same wolf mask found near Doreen's house. On the previous Halloween, he wore it to a party, and police even discovered a photo of Michael wearing the mask. To eliminate any doubts, they found in his home the exact clothing he wore in that photo. But the story of the mask didn't end there. To further strengthen the case, police interviewed all of Doreen's neighbors about that evening. It turned out that children going door to door for candy saw an adult man wearing a wolf mask standing across the street from the victim's house, staring at it. Notably, they spotted him around 7 p.m., 2 hours before the murder. Michael's trial began in July 1988, 4 years after the murder. Initially, he pleaded guilty, but later changed his plea. He didn't deny committing the murder, but claimed innocence due to mental health issues. A psychologist assigned to him concluded that he indeed had serious mental problems. Michael told him that he snapped because of Halloween. Witnessing other kids joyfully trick-or-treating remind him of Paul's death, triggering his breakdown. According to Michael, he went to Doreen's house with a machete on that evening. When she opened the door, he said, "You killed my son," and added that he intended to murder her. She immediately recognized the man behind the mask, screamed for her daughter to run, and in the second, Michael attacked her. He insisted that he was unaware of Doreen's pregnancy, a claim that seemed hard to believe. Standing at just 4 feet tall, all her friends insisted it was impossible not to notice her pregnancy. Before the tragedy, they even joked that because of her belly, Doreen had become broader than taller. The prosecution argued that the man was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance. During the investigation, detectives discovered he had told friends about his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband, then dispose of their bodies in the bay. Given that they found 2 coffins and body bags in his home, the prosecution suggested he intended to carry out this plan, but changed his mind for some reason. Perhaps he panicked or feared staying in the house too long, thinking he might get caught. Doreen's daughter, Diana, also gave testimony during the trial. At the time, she was 9 years old and still had a vivid recollection of the events. Though Charles wanted to shield his daughter from the trauma, she was the only person who had witnessed the crime. The trial lasted for a year, and in the end, Michael was found guilty of murdering both Doreen and her child. He was sentenced to death, but while awaiting execution, California implemented a moratorium on the death penalty. As a result, Michael remains incarcerated to this day, with little chance of his sentence being carried out anytime soon. Many years later, Diana shared that the memory of the murder haunted her throughout her life, constantly reminding her of the horrific events. Eventually, she chose to forgive Michael and try to move forward, fearing that holding on to the pain would lead her to lose her sanity. Laurel Jean Mitchell. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on May 24, 1958, in Whitley County, Indiana, to parents Richard and Wilma Mitchell. She grew up in North Webster, Indiana, alongside her siblings, Sarah and Bruce. At the time, North Webster had a population of around 500 and was considered a very safe community. It was a place where residents rarely locked their doors. Parents felt comfortable letting their children ride bikes freely around the traffic-free streets, and neighbors often spent hours socializing on their front porches. By 1975, Laurel, a 17-year-old senior at Wawasee High School, worked at Cokesbury and in the Epworth Forest neighborhood, situated on the shores of Webster Lake. For her, the job offered a perfect chance to gain valuable experience while earning some extra money. Laurel approached everything with determination and enthusiasm, fully investing herself in the role. Laurel Mitchell quickly became a favorite among both the staff and the customers at Cokesbury Inn. She was actively involved in her local church youth group and was also a member of a traveling singing group called God's Children. The group toured across the United States, recording music and releasing a couple of albums. Laurel was deeply religious, with her faith playing a central role in her life. Most of her free time was spent at church, and although she had the occasional disagreement with her siblings, she shared a strong and close-knit bond with them that only grew as time went on. Laurel was adored in her community, where her warm smile and kind demeanor won over everyone she met. One of her most cherished traits was her genuine kindness and caring nature, which made her particularly beloved by the neighborhood children. It was common to see Laurel surrounded by children, all eager to be in her company. She had a variety of talents, with a natural gift for singing that made her an integral part of the local church choir. Laurel was also a skilled dancer, having taken lessons at a local studio to perfect her craft. For her, singing and dancing were more than just pastimes. They were an essential part of her life. On the afternoon of August 6, 1975, the day began just like any other. Laurel and her siblings completed their morning chores, and Laurel left for work around 2 p.m. Her 12-year-old sister, Sarah, stayed home that day. Laurel's brother Bruce was married and stationed in California with the Army at the time, and one of her friends from Michigan was staying with the family. After finishing her shift at the snack bar around 10 p.m., Laurel was headed to meet friends at Adventureland Amusement Park, which was about a half-mile walk away. A co-worker offered her a ride, but Laurel declined, choosing to walk instead. She was last seen walking toward the amusement park on the north side of North Webster. A family friend, Scott Pruitt, spotted her as she passed by the pillars marking the entrance to Epworth Forest. He waved at her, and she waved back before continuing past the pillars. That was the final confirmed sighting of Laurel Mitchell. Laurel never showed up to meet her friends at the amusement park, as they had decided to go to the county fair instead, which included the friend from Michigan. As a result, no one realized Laurel was missing until she didn't come home by midnight. Known for being responsible, Laurel would always call her parents if she were going to be late. When she still hadn't returned home by curfew, her family became worried. The situation became even clearer when the friend from Michigan arrived at the Mitchell home and asked, "Where is Laurel?" The friends thought she had gone home, and her family assumed she was with her friends. This misunderstanding led Laurel's parents, Richard and Wilma Mitchell, to report her as a missing person at 4:16 a.m. the following morning. The dispatcher took their information and assured them that a unit would be sent out to take the report. An extensive search was immediately launched by the police, as well as by Richard Mitchell, family members, and friends of Laurel. Richard himself walked the ditches along the road, worried that she might have been struck by a car and thrown into the side. Concerned neighbors and friends gathered to comb through the woods and check the roadsides, hoping to find any sign of Laurel. Investigators quickly concluded that Laurel never made it to Adventureland, suggesting that something must have happened to her on the way there. A few hours after she was reported missing, at around 10:30 a.m., a fisherman named Glenn Dixon and his son discovered a woman's body in the Elkhart River at the Mallard Bruce Public Access Site on Noble County Road 600 North, just west of 400 West. They immediately called 911, waded into the water to retrieve the body, which was found face down on the west bank of the river near the boat landing ramp. The body was floating in about waist-deep water. State police initially could not identify the woman, but they estimated that the body had been in the water for about a day. They checked missing persons reports in the area that matched the victim's description. The woman was described as being 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing about 160 pounds, with long brown hair. After further investigation, police identified her as Laurel Mitchell, based on a class ring from Lossie High School, class of 1976, which was found on her. Her initials, LJM, were engraved inside the ring. At first, investigators believed the death might have been an accidental drowning, especially considering Laurel's reputation as a strong swimmer. However, this theory changed once the autopsy report came back. The autopsy was conducted later that same day, on August 7, 1975, by Dr. Peel Sankey at Goshing General Hospital. The autopsy report revealed that Laurel had been forcibly drowned and signs of assault were present. It also showed evidence that she had fought violently to survive. The police speculated that much of the evidence had been washed away by the water, as only a small bruise was found on her hand and a few abrasions under her arms. When the police arrived at Laurel's parents' home, Richard and Wilma were anxiously waiting for news about their daughter. They were not prepared for the devastating information the officers brought. As they learned the tragic fate of their daughter, Richard's eyes filled with tears, and Wilma was left inconsolable. Laurel's funeral became a poignant moment for the community of North Webster, as it highlighted the close-knit bond among the residents. The funeral home was overwhelmed with flowers, and the outpouring of support from the community was so great that there was no more room for the people who came to mourn her. The funeral for Laurel Mitchell drew an overwhelming crowd of well-wishers, friends, and family members who wanted to pay their respects. Due to the sheer number of people, the service had to be moved to the church. Laurel's sister, Sarah, recalled, "I don't remember the sermon at all. I just remember sitting between my dad and my brother, and they were both squeezing my hand so hard. As they left the church, they were met with the sight of people lined up down the street, many of whom couldn't fit inside the church." After the funeral, The investigation into Laurel's tragic death intensified, with detectives from various state and local agencies working tirelessly. They scoured through evidence and conducted numerous interviews. On August 9, 1975, a crucial call was received at 3:15 p.m. The caller had important information but abruptly hung up before they could provide full details or reveal their identity. This mysterious call further complicated the investigation, leaving more questions than answers. Investigators made an appeal for the person to contact them again, and they would do their best to keep her identity private. Police set up a headquarters for the continuing investigation in North Webster. One local witness, identified as Catherine Flynn, said around 10 p.m. that night, she heard a loud car turn around next door. She said she heard voices say, "Let's get her." Investigators interviewed Catherine, who lived half a mile east of Epworth Forest on Epworth Forest Road. She said she was home on Wednesday, August 6, 1975, and that around 10 p.m. or a little later, an old car turned into the drive next door and turned around as it came back by her house. She informed investigators that she heard several voices say, "Let's get her." She said the car was very loud and probably a dark color. Another local, Frank Overmeyer, told investigators he also heard a loud vehicle in the neighborhood, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. They went to interview Frank Overmeyer and his wife on August 14, 1975. The Overmeyers lived on Epworth Forest Road just west of Epworth Forest. Frank Overmeyer said on August 6, 1975, he was at home watching TV and heard a loud car go by, and the car turned around and stopped east of their house. Frank reported he then heard what he thought sounded like someone slamming the trunk on a car. Frank reported he turned on his porch light and stepped outside. When he stepped out, 2 cars were leaving the area. The first car was the one that had gone by his house that he described was a red-orange GM product, possibly an Oldsmobile Cutlass. The second vehicle was a medium green Mustang. The Oldsmobile was very loud and sounded like it was loud by design. All of the clothing and belongings found on Laurel's body were collected and preserved for DNA testing, including shoes, a sweatshirt, bra, underwear, and denim jeans. Unfortunately, due to the lack of DNA technology at the time, there was little that could be done with the clothing. Detectives from the Kosciuszko County Sheriff's Department and Indiana State Police examined the case closely through the years. The location of Laurel's abduction and the discovery of her body in the Elkhart River about 15 miles from Epworth Forest seemed to indicate that the perpetrator was familiar with the area. Many people were interviewed, and despite being a $5,000 reward offered, there was never enough evidence to charge anyone. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case slowly faded from the headlines and went cold. For Laurel's family and friends, the pain of her loss remained. In February 2007, Indiana State Police Captain Kevin Smith was assigned as the lead investigator on Laurel's case. He was a man on a mission and was determined to provide answers that had eluded Laurel's family for so long. The pressure was on, but Captain Smith knew that he would do whatever it takes to give Laurel's loved ones the closure they deserved. Despite his best efforts, no new leads or evidence surfaced for several years, leaving him and his team frustrated. Then on January 16, 2012, Laurel's father, Richard Mitchell, passed away. He was a well-known public figure in North Webster. Laurel's mother, Wilma Mitchell, also passed away in February 2012. She operated the North Webster Food Pantry for several years. They passed never knowing what exactly happened to their 17-year-old daughter or why. It was a heartbreaking end for a couple who had dedicated their lives to seeking answers and closure for their daughter. In February 2013, a woman called Renee from Port Charlotte, Florida came forward and gave investigators a lot of useful information. Detective Dunafin interviewed Renee on June 7, 2013. She informed the detective that she lived in Noble County as a teenager and that she was 16 years old in 1975. She went on a date with a man named John Wayne Lehman, and while on the date, they went to a party. After the party, John Wayne Lehman was driving her home when Lehman admitted his involvement in a crime that he committed with his friend. Fred Bandy Jr. Lehman provided details of the crime to Renee that are consistent with the findings made by police where Laurel's body was found and the anatomical findings made by Dr. Sankey during the autopsy of her body. On July 3, 2014, investigators interviewed Bill McDonald at the Ligonier Police Department. Bill indicated that back in 1975, he was a sophomore at West Noble High School and that he socialized with a man named Fred Bandy Jr. Bill told investigators that Bandy told him that he had committed the crime that took place at Mallard's Roost, which was a public access site adjacent to the location where Laurel's body was found. Also in February 2014, Captain Kevin Smith received information about a local music group that performed in Epworth Forest the night of August 6, 1975. They were identified as the Celebrate the Sun group. This generated renewed interest in the case. Unfortunately, it did not lead anywhere. Captain Smith said, "I feel pretty confident after speaking with someone from that group. I don't believe they have information that will help." On September 25, 2019, Noble County Sheriff's Department Detective Joe Hutzel met with Rick Johnson to interview him about the Laurel Mitchell case. Rick Johnson informed Detective Hutzel that he was friends with Bill McDonald and that while he was in high school, he, Bill McDonald, Fred Bandy, John Wayne Lehman, and others were at a party together. While at the party, a conversation about the slaying of Laurel Mitchell came up, and Fred Bandy Jr. stated he and John Wayne Lehman committed that crime together. Investigators needed more than just reports from witnesses. They needed DNA evidence linking Bandy and Lehman to the crime. Advances had been made in cold cases in recent years due to new technology such as genetic genealogy, which involves putting a suspect or victim's DNA profile into a public database, allowing them to reverse engineer a family tree. This enables investigation of multiple branches of a family's tree to determine who could be a viable suspect in an unsolved case. Another recent advancement factoring into solving cold cases is the use of touch DNA samples. This method requires minuscule amounts of DNA, such as skin cells from the perpetrator that may be left on objects at a crime scene. A breakthrough enabling an accurate genotype from rootless hair is another technique now available. Until February 2019, forensic scientists were only able to extract DNA from hairs found at crime scenes if the root of the hair was attached. Unfortunately, most hairs do not have the root attached. This breakthrough in DNA extraction from rootless hair is extremely useful in solving crimes. Solving cold cases often involves a diligent and time-consuming re-examination of evidence from files and the efforts of experienced investigators. By February 2019, Laurel Mitchell's clothes and evidence were resubmitted for DNA testing. In February 2020, a certificate of analysis was generated by Indiana State Police Laboratory Division that showed a male DNA profile was developed from the clothing. After 3 suspects were eliminated as possibilities, attention shifted to Fred Bandy for a buccal swab. Bandy voluntarily provided the DNA sample on December 5, 2022 at his residence. On January 13, 2023, the state laboratory found that Fred Bandy Jr.'s buccal swab showed he is 13 billion times more likely contributor of the DNA on Laurel Mitchell's clothing than any other unknown person. A review of Indiana State Police records also disclosed that Bandy was driving a 1971 Oldsmobile at the time, which is consistent with eyewitness statements from area residents on that fateful night. Investigators concluded that Lehman and Bandy, with premeditated malice, used Bandy's Oldsmobile to bring Laurel to the Mallard Roost public access site in Noble County, where they forcibly removed her from the vehicle and deliberately drowned her. While the Indiana State Police declined to comment on the specific techniques used to solve the case, Ashley Hall, the director of the Forensic Science Graduate Program at the University of California, explained. She said the method seemed to be a standard genetic identification technology used in crime labs called STR or short tandem repeat. The technology is developing to become more and more sensitive. It is being developed to pick up smaller and smaller amounts of DNA. We can pick up much more DNA than we used to be able to. Laurel Mitchell's case is a good example of the power and evolution of DNA testing to assist in criminal investigations. Dr. Hull said, "We're not done with our work until every family, every victim has an answer. And the fact that we can go back to cases that are this old, this is where we should be going," she said. Captain Kevin Smith, who has been working the case for over 20 years, said this case is a culmination of a 5 decades-long investigation, and science finally gave us the answers we needed. Playing a significant role in charges being filed was the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division. We simply could not have solved this case without them. He also said that the investigation of the case had followed a similar pattern of other such cases. Witnesses pass away. Memories fade. All those hurdles make it very difficult, especially when you go back this far. On Monday, February 6, 2023, the Indiana State Police arrested 67-year-old John Wayne Lehman and 67-year-old Fred Bandy Jr. It was announced to the public that John Lehman and Bandy Jr., both 67-year-old residents of Indiana, have been identified as the suspects responsible for what happened to Laurel Jean Mitchell. Bandy lived in 1014 Fifth Street in Goshen, Indiana, and Lehman lived at 108 Clark Street in Auburn, Indiana. Both are being held without bond at the Noble County Jail. This is not the first time that Fred Bandy Jr. is in trouble with law. He is a twice-convicted child abuser and deemed a violent predator. In February 2001, he pleaded guilty to child solicitation and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. In February 2016, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child abuse and served nearly 6 years. During an initial hearing on February 8, 2023, Bandy and Lehman were informed by Noble Circuit Court Judge Michael Kramer they each face a charge of taking Laurel's life in the first degree. With current Indiana law, an individual convicted of such a charge faces a prison sentence between 45 and 65 years, with the advisory sentence being 55 years. However, since Laurel's slaying occurred in 1975, if the men are convicted, Bandy and Lehman could be sentenced to life in prison, which was the maximum possible prison sentence at that time. Also, during the initial hearing, a pretrial conference for both Bandy and Lehman was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. on April 24, 2023 in Noble County. Laurel's sister, Sarah, who was 12 years old back in 1975, recently did an interview with the New York Times after the arrests were made. She described their childhood in North Webster as typical before the horror visited her family. It was just a very small town, laid back. We felt safe, she said. We came and went as we pleased in the summer, and parents did not worry about us. She was a really good person. It's like, gosh, you picked somebody really good to do this to, somebody who could have done a lot of good in this world. I'm very glad they were finally arrested and very appreciative of the people who came forward. Sarah recalled how Captain Smith had carried around big books that detailed the names and addresses of everyone the authorities had interviewed over the years. There were over 1,000 names in there, she said. When Captain Smith called Sarah and her brother, Bruce Mitchell, to let them know they had arrested 2 men, she was surprised but mostly wished her parents had been alive to see it. 47 years had passed, but for Sarah Mitchell, the pain of that day remained as fresh as ever. Right now it feels like yesterday, she said. On that fateful night when Laurel didn't return home, 12-year-old Sarah had somehow slept through the uncertainty. When she awoke the next morning, she was more confused than concerned, unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. She had a softball game that day, and despite the growing tension at home, her parents encouraged her to go. As Sarah played, focused on the game, she didn't know that her world was about to change forever. Halfway through, a neighbor woman appeared at the ball field in the Mitchell family car. I saw her pull up to the ball diamond, Sarah recalled. Immediately, Sarah told her coach she had to leave. The neighbor told her that she had been sent to pick her up, though Sarah was still unaware of what was going on. As they neared home, the sight of police cars surrounding the house stopped her in her tracks. The neighbor's somber words cut through the air. They're here to look for your sister. Sarah's heart began to race. As they entered through the back door, she saw her father. Tears filled his eyes as he told her the unthinkable. Laurel was gone. Gone? Sarah asked, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of what he was saying. At just 12 years old, Sarah struggled to comprehend the devastating news. Gone where? She had wondered before her father finally broke the heartbreaking news. Her big sister Laurel, the one who always took care of her, as big sisters do, was gone. It was a realization that shook her to her core. Years later, when she saw the accused, Lehman and Bandy, in court, Sarah reflected on their appearances. At 12, they would have been scary. They look like very frail men, and I do not need to be afraid of them. Despite the eventual convictions of the men responsible for her sister's death, Sarah expressed that it did little to bring closure. I'm glad they are going to be punished, that they won't be able to hurt anyone else, but she's still not coming back to us. Convictions would not bring closure for me. I do not think there is such a thing. For Sarah, the grief remains ongoing, a burden that can't be erased by the judicial process or the passing of time. She, like her family, would continue to mourn Laurel, knowing that no punishment moving on to the next case. Shelley Connolly. In the quiet stretch of Seward Highway south of Anchorage, Alaska, a haunting discovery in 1978 marked the start of a long-standing mystery when the body of 16-year-old Shelley Connolly was found. The case eventually went cold, leaving her loved ones without answers, until 2019, when forensic technology finally unraveled the case. Raised in Anchorage, Shelley was an energetic and adventurous teenager with a strong bond to her family. Petite in stature, she was often described as having a natural beauty, though her mother later remarked that Shelley didn't quite realize how attractive she was. Although she dropped out of high school, Shelley was determined to forge her own path. With a passion for beauty and personal care, she was set to begin cosmetology classes. At just 16, she was also engaged to a man stationed at Fort Richardson in the military. January 7, 1978, began as any other day in Anchorage shrouded in thick fog, a day that would later be forever etched in the memories of those who knew Shelley. It was a day that Judy Connolly, Shelley's mother, would replay in her mind countless times over the years. That evening, Shelley had plans to go out. She chose an outfit that matched her bold personality. And despite her mother's concerns about her revealing clothing, Shelley slipped on a ski jacket her parents had gifted her for Christmas and headed to Chilkoot Charlie's, a popular Anchorage bar. Though underage, Shelley blended in with the crowd of young adults who frequented the bar. At the time, Chilkoot Charlie's was a hotspot, fueled by the oil boom that had brought a surge of young men with disposable incomes to the area. Later that night, Shelley was seen leaving the bar in the company of several men. Witnesses later reported spotting her at Lyra's, a 24-hour diner on C Street. However, the timeline of her movements started to become increasingly unclear. Sometime after leaving Lyra's, Shelley's night took a tragic turn. The following morning, two female hikers walking along the Seward Highway noticed something down an embankment near the train tracks. What they first mistook for discarded trash or debris turned out to be something much more disturbing. Lying motionless in the snow was the body of Shelley Connolly, her petite frame partially covered by the fresh snow. The hikers immediately notified the authorities, and soon Alaska state troopers arrived on the scene. They quickly secured the area as investigators from the Alaska Bureau of Investigation joined them. The state medical examiner would later confirm that Shelley had been brutally assaulted and left to die in the frigid Alaskan winter. She had been beaten, and her body showed signs of a violent attack. In the end, a combination of internal injuries, including a ruptured spleen, and the exposure to the freezing temperatures ultimately took her life. Evidence suggested that after she was assaulted, Shelley had been thrown from a moving car. Her hand became trapped in the door, and the vehicle dragged her some distance before her assailants realized what had happened. When they stopped the car and freed her, they callously discarded her over the side of the embankment, deserting her in the cold of the night. There were faint marks in the snow signs that she had tried to crawl up after being thrown out of the vehicle. Initial efforts focused on piecing together the events leading up to Shelley's tragic demise. Troopers interviewed witnesses, including patrons of Chilkoot Charlie's and Lyra's Diner, trying to trace her movements from the night before. Despite numerous interviews and efforts to reconstruct her last hours, the investigation hit a series of ends. The Alaska state troopers quickly realized that the case would require more advanced forensic techniques. By 1997, with forensic DNA technology becoming a viable tool for solving cases, the Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory began developing a DNA profile from the biological evidence collected during Shelley's autopsy. This profile aimed to match the unidentified suspect's DNA with known profiles and codices. In February 2003, the DNA profile from Shelley's case was uploaded into codices. Even with this step forward in the right direction, there was no match found, and the investigation remained at a standstill. The case was reopened and evidence re-examined multiple times throughout the years, yielding no new leads. It was not until February 2019 that investigators finally got a break in the cold case. In early 2019, the Alaska State Troopers Cold Case Unit turned to genetic genealogy for new insights. This innovative forensic technique involves submitting a DNA profile from the crime scene to Powerbond Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company specializing in DNA analysis and genealogy. Powerbond Nanolabs compared the DNA profile from Shelley's case to profiles in public genealogical databases, such as GEDmatch. They identified a man named Donald F. McQuaid as a person of interest based on genetic connections to the DNA profile. The results indicated that McQuaid, who was 21 years old at the time of Shelley's slaying, was a likely suspect. Following this identification, Alaska State Troopers conducted a thorough investigation to confirm the link. They obtained a DNA sample from McQuaid and compared it with the evidence collected from Shelley's autopsy. The match was conclusive. DNA samples collected from 2 locations on Shelley's body matched McQuaid's DNA profile. The breakthrough led to McQuaid's arrest in September 2019. It was a pivotal moment in the case, bringing renewed hope to Shelley Connolly's family and the community. Shelley's mother, Judy, said that she felt many emotions when she was told that her daughter's perpetrator was finally found. She said happiness that they found him. Sad too. 41 years. So this was totally unexpected. The evidence against McQuaid was compelling. The DNA match firmly linked him to the crime scene, and further investigation verified that he had been in Alaska in 1978, aligning with the timeline of the slaying. The legal proceedings that followed were intensive. McQuaid faced charges of first-degree and second-degree. The case was handled by Assistant Attorneys General Aaron McCarthy and Paige Smothers, who worked tirelessly to build a strong case for the court. The prosecution emphasized the severity of the crime and the profound impact it had on Shelley's family, pushing for a sentence that would reflect both the seriousness of the offense and McQuaid's advanced age. On April 26, 2024, Superior Court Judge Andrew Peterson sentenced McQuaid to 50 years in prison for the murder of Shelley Connolly. In his remarks, Judge Peterson highlighted the gravity of the crime and the long-awaited justice for Shelley and her family. He pointed out that while McQuaid had lived a full life and witnessed his children grow up, Shelley's family had been robbed of those same years with her. The sentencing was an emotional moment for the Connolly family, who had spent over 4 decades waiting for closure. They felt a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that while justice had been served, it could never truly make up for the loss of Shelley. Shelley's mother, Judy, said, "Whatever the new technology is, I'm just so glad it came around and solved this crime. Hopefully, it will solve other unsolved cases as well." Moving on to the next case. Roger Scott Dunn. Roger Scott, born on February 10, 1967, in Lubbock, Texas, was one of 2 sons born to Jim and Mary Sue Dunn. He was known as Scott to everyone and was described as a fun-loving jokester and a ladies' man. By 1991, at 24 years old, he had left the military and settled in Lubbock, where he worked at MGM Electronics, specializing in custom sound system installations for vehicles. Scott had a passion for working on cars and had even won stereo installation competitions. Additionally, he bought, restored, and resold used cars on his own. He was in a relationship with Latia Hamilton, a 28-year-old waitress. On the evening of May 13, 1991, Scott attended a party at a friend's house. Suddenly, Scott became very ill. He was unable to walk or drive home and ended up sleeping at his friend's house. The following morning, Laisha came to pick him up so he could rest in their apartment at Oakwood Club Apartments, located at 581820 4th Street. By May 15th, Scott felt well enough to return to work. His car was still at his friend's place, so he made arrangements for his friends to give him a ride to work. Scott informed Latia about the arrangement with his friends. She made him tea before leaving for work. When his friends arrived at the apartment, Scott didn't respond to the door. Latia returned home later and told them that Scott must have left while she was at work. Scott didn't come home that night, and for the next 2 days there was no sign of him. Latia then contacted Scott's father, Jim Dunn, who lived in Pennsylvania, to inform him that Scott had disappeared. Jim Dunn reached out to the Lubbock Police Department to file a missing persons report. He explained to detectives that it was unusual for Scott to leave his beloved Camaro, known as the Yellow Submarine, and his tools at work. When the police arrived at Scott and Laisha's apartment, Laisha pointed out that a piece of carpet was missing from under the couch. The police later discovered that the missing carpet piece was in Scott's bedroom. It had been duct taped together with the carpet in the bedroom. A piece of carpet had been removed from the bedroom. Along the seam, the police noticed a rusty-colored stain. It was clear that it was blood. There was another large stain on the padding underneath the carpet in one section. The blood on the padding had seeped down to the concrete below. It also looked like someone had cleaned blood off of the baseboard of the wall. The investigators used luminol to test the room. The room lit up. It was obvious that someone, presumably Scott, had suffered a violent attack. Investigators looked at Scott's life and the people he knew to see if anything stood out to them. Scott had a previous arrest for using illegal substances. At age 23, he was arrested in connection with a Domino's pizza robbery. The police followed up on this to see if anyone might have had reasons to hurt Scott because of the substances or money. They didn't find anything useful. Looking at Scott's relationship with Laisha, investigators found a lot of oddities. It seemed that Scott wasn't able to commit to Laisha as much as she would have liked. 1 month before Scott's disappearance, Laisha had learned that Scott was engaged to another woman. Investigators saw this as a possible motive. Could Laisha have sought revenge against Scott? Scott's friends told investigators something worrisome about Laisha. A family friend of Scott said that Scott was afraid to break up with Laisha. Laisha's ex-boyfriends warned Scott that she could lather herself up into violent jealous rages. Laisha continued to contact Jim to talk about the case. Jim taped all of their phone calls. For some reason, Laisha didn't really seem that interested in finding Scott. She often talked about his sports car. She even asked Jim if she could have it. Laisha told Jim that she didn't want the car but needed it. Laisha was clearly getting impatient about having to wait for the car. This was really odd behavior. Investigators learned that Laisha had a criminal record. She had been arrested in New Mexico for embezzlement. Investigators continued looking into the possibility that she was responsible, but then she actually came up with the first suspect. Laisha told Jim that she believed a man named Tim Smith was involved in Scott's disappearance. Tim lived near Scott and Laisha and became infatuated with her. The police went to speak to Tim at his apartment and saw that he was packing up to move. Tim willingly let the police search his apartment. When the police walked back out to the room where Tim was standing, they discovered that Tim had moved a roll of duct tape that was on his bookshelf. Tim claimed he didn't move anything, but the police found it hidden behind some books. The tape was sent in for forensic testing. Using infrared lights to look at different wavelengths and components of the tape, the results were that the tape from Tim's apartment were consistent with the tape used on the carpet in Scott's bedroom. On the side of the tape, triangular green carpet fibers were found, which were the same color as the carpet in Scott's bedroom. Unfortunately, without a body, there wasn't much else investigators could do, and the case went cold. Jim got impatient and set out to find answers himself. He met with a group called the Vidic Society. It's a group of 82 international forensic experts. The group is a members-only group that meets in Philadelphia to try to solve unsolved crimes. Jim met with Richard Walter, a co-founder of the group, to go over the case of his son. Richard immediately confirmed that Scott is not alive anymore. Furthermore, he was convinced that Laisha held the answers. Richard sent the information to Dr. Richard Shepard of New Scotland Yard. Dr. Shepard concluded that Scott's life was taken in his bedroom and had been struck multiple times with a blunt object. He conducted multiple tests and confirmed that with the amount of blood that was lost, no one could have survived. Richard Walter begged the district attorney to take this case to trial. Richard said that they didn't have a body, but had a body part, the blood's connective tissue. Richard Walter noticed that there were unidentified hairs in the duct tape found in Scott's bedroom. It was sent in for testing and was determined to be hair from both Tim Smith and Latia Hamilton. Smith and Hamilton were finally arrested 3 years after Scott disappeared in 1994. It is believed that Scott's life was taken in the early morning hours of May 16, 1991. While he was asleep, Scott was struck 4 times with a blunt object. Hamilton and Smith tried to clean up the scene, but obviously left behind too much evidence. It is believed that Leisha wanted revenge after finding out that Scott had been seeing other women and was engaged. Smith probably helped Hamilton because she manipulated him, and he was obsessed with her. They were tried separately and both convicted. Latia Hamilton was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while Smith received 10 years of probation. The jury believed that Smith had helped Hamilton clean up and dispose of evidence, but they weren't convinced he was present during the crime. The reasoning behind Leisha's relatively short sentence in Texas remains unclear, but she had to serve the full term after being denied parole multiple times. After her release, Leisha disappeared from the public eye. Unfortunately, neither Hamilton nor Smith would reveal the location of Scott's body. In February 2012, Jim Dunn received the news he had been waiting for when Victims Assistance Services in Lubbock informed him that a work crew had discovered skeletal remains in a sewage system near Scott's apartment complex. Dental records confirmed the remains were indeed Scott's. On June 16, 2012, the Dunn family laid Scott to rest in a grave marked by a stone bearing an engraving of his Camaro. Jim Dunn was quoted as saying, "I tell everyone that Scott came home for Father's Day." Moving on to the next case. Mary Pryor and Leonard. Mary Pryor and her husband, Leonard, lived in Flint, Michigan, where they owned Sweet Marie's candy store for many years before selling it. Afterward, they moved to Lennon, Michigan to enjoy their retirement. Leonard passed away in 1990, and in the years that followed, Mary became a well-known figure in the small village. A devout Catholic, Mary frequently attended church functions. Residents of Lennon would often see her walking from her home to the town diner for lunch and dinner on most days. On February 27, 1997, Michigan State Police K-9 teams, who were conducting training in the area, discovered the body of 88-year-old Mary in a wooded area near her home. She had been beaten, strangled, and assaulted. The crime sent shockwaves through the close-knit Lennon community. Investigators gathered DNA evidence at the crime scene, which was linked to the suspect. They conducted hundreds of interviews and followed up on numerous leads. The investigation soon focused on Michael Burr, a teenager who lived just a short distance from Mary's house. At the time, he was in the 11th grade. Investigators took his DNA sample so it could be stored, as DNA was not advanced enough at the time to confirm that his DNA matched what was found at the crime scene. Unfortunately, investigators could not gather enough evidence to meet the probable cause standard to charge him in connection with the case. Recently, the Genesee County Police Department partnered up with the Michigan State Police Crime Lab to finally help solve the case. In February, they were able to match the DNA found at the scene to that of Michael Burr. Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton said that DNA evidence shows 1 in 1.9 octillion chance that Michael was not responsible for what happened to Mary. Ultimately, what we want here is closure for the victim's family, he said. We want closure because when you lose a loved one in such a brutal manner, it never goes away from your mind. You never have a peaceful day when you can stop thinking about it. Michael Burr was then held in the Genesee County Jail without bond. He had a probable cause hearing in Genesee County District Court on February, where prosecutors laid out the evidence against him. The case was brought to a close in February when Michael Burr was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson shared his thoughts after the sentencing, stating, "Although Mary was not related to me by blood, my family grew up with her. I was assigned to this case as a young detective sergeant, and 21 years later here we are." He continued, "When you see people come forward and provide families with answers, especially in such a violent case like this, that's why we clip the heels and take the oath. That's why we become police officers and investigators." Swanson concluded, "Although I don't have the same relationship with Mary as the family behind me, Mary is my family, and it's a great day." Moving on to the next case. Terrence Paquette. At around 7 a.m. on February 3, 1996, the Orange County Police Department responded to a call concerning Lilsham Convenience Store, located on Clark-Ona-Ocoee Road in Orlando, Florida. A witness had reported an unusual finding that morning. He explained that while driving by the store at approximately 6:55 a.m., he noticed the lights were off, which struck him as odd since the store typically opened by that time. Curious about what might be going on, the witness tried to enter the store. However, before doing so, he parked nearby to peer through the windows. He said he didn't see any store employees, which seemed strange to him. Feeling unsettled, the witness contacted the police to express his concerns before leaving the area. Upon arriving at the scene, deputies found 2 employees from an armored car company waiting to collect a cash deposit from the store, but the door was locked. The deputies attempted to contact the store by phone, but there was no answer. They then conducted a quick search around the premises and discovered a white car parked in the lot. After running a license plate check, deputies learned that the white car belonged to the store manager, Terrence Paquette. They attempted to contact his residence to confirm if he was home, but received no response. With no way to access the store since it was locked from the outside, the deputies were at a standstill. Fortunately, another employee, who had closed the store the night before, happened to drive by and noticed the police. He offered to help and provided his keys, allowing the deputies to enter. As they worked to open the door, the deputies noticed a small amount of blood on the exterior lock. Once inside, they discovered the lifeless body of Terrence Paquette in the men's restroom, lying in a pool of blood. The medical examiner later confirmed that Paquette had been the victim of a brutal attack, suffering 73 stab wounds across his neck, torso, and limbs. His heart and lungs had been severely punctured, leading to his death. Investigators noted a significant amount of bloodstains throughout the store, leading them to believe that the person responsible for Terrence Paquette's murder had also been injured. Blood was found in multiple areas, including the freezer door, the freezer flap, the lottery machine behind the counter, the key cylinder on the entry and exit door, and the door push bar. The blood pattern suggested the suspect moved through the store, starting from the restroom to the beverage freezer, then behind the cash register where money was stolen, and finally to the entry and exit door, likely where the perpetrator fled. Deputies determined that after taking about $1,000 from the safe beneath the cash register, the killer took Paquette's keys and locked the store's doors. At the time, the murder of Terrence Paquette deeply troubled both the police and his family. Paquette had arrived at Lille Champ food store between 5 and 6 a.m. to open for business, as he did regularly. Sadly, within minutes of entering the store, he was violently attacked and killed by an unknown assailant. In another, he said she was on holiday with a friend in the Canary Islands. And at other times, he simply said that he didn't know where she was. Friends of Helly grew concerned. It wasn't like the mother of 3 to just up and disappear without contacting anyone, and they were well aware of Richard's aggression and temperament, having had Helly tell them of the details of her and her husband's relationship. He was reportedly even physically abusive. At one point shortly before her death, she told France, "If something happens to me, don't think it was an accident." She even told this to her divorce lawyer, who described the unusualness of the statement in her interview on the TV show Forensic Files. When authorities were eventually alerted to the troubling disappearance of the 39-year-old flight attendant, they went to search the family home. One of the first things they noticed was the missing pieces of carpet from the floor in the master bedroom. The Crafts nanny recalled that there was a dark grapefruit-size stain on one of the pieces of carpet which had now been removed. This had investigators worried, and as they continued to look around, they also found evident blood smears on the side of the bed, and that a large freezer was missing from the home. As they looked into Richard Kraft's bank records, they found that he had purchased several interesting items around the time that his wife disappeared: new bedsheets and a duvet, and the rental of a wood chipper. Papers that were provided to a private investigator by Richard included the receipt of a chainsaw too. The fears that family and friends of Helly Crafts held were confirmed when a snowplow driver came forward and said that he'd seen Richard at the shore of Lake Sohar. A search of the lake found the purchased chainsaw covered in blood and hair, which was later proven to match Helly. Then in or near the water, police found further evidence of foul play, including metal pieces, 85 grams of human tissue, including a tooth with unique dental work, a fingernail with pink polish, bone chips, 2,660 bleached blonde human hairs, and O-negative type blood, the same type as Helly's. From these horrifying discoveries, police concluded that the remains of Helly Crafts had been fed into the wood chipper. To test this theory out, the medical examiner used a pig's body to recreate the damage a wood chipper would cause to the bones, and it was found that the pig's bone fragments bore a similar shape to those of Helly's and had the same marks on. Investigators determined that Helly Crafts had been struck in the head multiple times, leaving the bloodstains on the carpet and the smear on the bed, and that her body was kept in a freezer before it was cut up with a chainsaw and fed through the wood chipper. The gruesome disposal of Helly's body shocked friends, family, and the local community. The prosecution of Richard Crafts required an official determination of death via body identification, which initially threw a spanner in the works of the investigation, as of course, Helly's body wasn't available. However, after a tooth found in the lake was found to match her dental records, the Connecticut State Medical Examiner's Office issued the death certificate for the mother of three. Richard Crafts was arrested in January 1987, and his trial began a year and a half later in May 1988. The first trial, which concluded in July, resulted in a hung jury. But a second trial in November 1989 led to a guilty verdict. During one of the proceedings, Richard's defense argued that Helle, being bilingual and fluent in 4 languages, could have simply disappeared, using her linguistic skills to start a new life elsewhere. However, this theory did not convince the second jury, who found the physical evidence against Richard overwhelming. Richard Crafts later appealed his conviction, but his request was denied. Helle's 3 children were placed in the care of one of Richard's sisters, who had supported the prosecution and advocated for a severe punishment. While no sentence could truly compensate for the loss felt by Helle's children, her mother, and her loved ones, Richard was given a 50-year prison term. He became eligible for parole in 2021. The Chun family tragedy. On the afternoon of October 8, 2014, a co-worker of 39-year-old Jean Jifing grew worried when the father of 2 failed to show up for his scheduled shift at King's Walk, a restaurant where he worked. He hadn't called in sick either, which was unusual. Concerned, the co-worker decided to check on Chan at his home on Western Avenue in the Guilderland suburb of Albany, New York. What he discovered inside was a horrific crime scene. Chan and his 38-year-old wife, Hai Yilin, were originally from Huaiyu, China. The couple had moved to the United States in the early 2000s, settling in Guilderland near a takeout restaurant owned by relatives. There, they built a life together and had 2 children, 10-year-old Anthony and 7-year-old Eddie. By all accounts, the Chin family was ordinary, with nothing unusual about their lives, making their brutal murders all the more puzzling to investigators. The case gained significant attention, as it was the first quadruple homicide in the Capital District. According to Chen's brother, who spoke to the media, the father of 2 was found on the ground floor of the family's bungalow. Hai and the couple's 2 children were discovered upstairs, their bodies covered by a blanket. The family had met a brutal end. Each of them had been bludgeoned with a hammer, and later reports indicated they had also been stabbed. Investigators determined the murders took place in the early morning hours, likely between 3:30 and 6:30 a.m. Both the Guilderland and New York State Police worked together on the case, searching the areas surrounding the family's home for any possible clues. Authorities faced several challenges in the initial 48 hours of the investigation. A language barrier slowed progress, and fear within the community made gathering information difficult. Further complicating matters, there were no surveillance cameras in the area, and Apple initially refused to release the Chen's iPhone records. Though the company eventually complied, law enforcement stated that the delays significantly hindered their investigation. With little physical evidence recovered from the crime scene, detectives have struggled to make progress. Some DNA samples were collected and may belong to a suspect, but so far, no matches have been found. As a result, authorities have few leads and no major suspects in the case. Before long, allegations surfaced that the family were involved in shady business practices and illegal activities such as human trafficking, gambling, and money laundering. Chen's brother denied rumors that the family had been attacked by someone who'd returned to the house after a gambling party to steal their sizable take from the been living comfortably ever since, causing people to think that he was making money illegally. This same source alleged that Hai was in the country illegally too. Meanwhile, an article by the Times-Union reported that Chan had supposedly been involved in large transfers of unrecorded cash, which he used to pay undocumented Chinese workers at restaurants in New York City. He reportedly also transported the workers to their jobs and back and provided accommodation in cities that were too far away for bus trips. Even more damningly, 18 mattresses were found on the basement floor of the family's home. The Times-Union also claimed that the weekly card game Chin ran had racked up about $100,000 in debt. However, this is where that lead dries up. Authorities have said that while the organized crime theory hasn't been discounted, they have yet to find any solid leads in the case. The only other theory explored in the case was a possible connection between the Chin family murders and two other family killings that occurred around the same time. In 2014, a family of 4 was shot and killed in their Houston, Texas home. Similarly, in 2011, a married couple and the wife's sister were found stabbed to death in their Mississippi residence. However, no definitive links have been established between these crimes. By 2015, investigators had pursued 600 leads, a surprisingly low number for such a serious case. A reporter from World Journal suggested that she and her colleagues suspected the family may have known more than they disclosed. The Chan's funeral took place a month after their deaths to allow time for relatives from overseas to attend. They were laid to rest at All Faith Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens. The case remains unsolved, and a $5,000 reward is still being offered for information leading to an arrest. Anyone with knowledge of the Chin family murders is encouraged to report it at capitalregionalcrimestoppers.com. https://capitalregionalcrimestoppers.com. Moving on to the next case. Kimberly Killer. On the morning of January 12, 1999, a woman's nearly beheaded body was discovered inside a car in Council Bluffs, Iowa. She was identified as Kimberly, and investigators determined that she had died 4 and 6 hours before being found. Authorities collected her clothing and other items from the crime scene, hoping that advancements in forensic science would eventually help identify the person responsible. In 2014, with improved DNA testing techniques, investigators submitted the evidence to the Iowa State Lab for analysis. By 2017, forensic officials informed law enforcement that they had discovered an unknown male DNA profile on an item of a personal nature, one that only Kimberly and her attacker would have had contact with. In August 2020, investigators compiled a list of 6 men who may have been in contact with Kimberly in the final hours of her life. The DNA from these individuals was compared to the unknown male profile found at the scene. The results revealed a match to 52-year-old Matt W. Kennedy, a resident of Fairfield, Montana, who had previously lived in Council Bluffs. Matt was not only Kimberly's stepbrother but also the last known person to have seen her alive. In October 2020, investigators received further confirmation when the DNA, found on an item that the suspect likely handled during the attack, also matched Matt Kennedy. He was arrested in mid-October 2020, bringing an end to a decades-long search for Kimberly's killer. Moving on to the next case. Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's start today's episode. The disappearance of Céline Feghart. A young French woman embarked on a journey to Britain to visit her relatives for Christmas, but she mysteriously disappeared along the way. Authorities swiftly launched an extensive search, and the case quickly gained widespread media attention in both France and the UK. As investigators followed a series of clues, they inched closer to uncovering the truth, only to find something far more disturbing than they had anticipated. Céline Feghart was born on May 23, 1976, in Besançon, a quiet and picturesque town near the Swiss border in France. Céline was raised in a warm and caring household alongside her parents, 2 brothers and a sister. Her father worked as a farmer, and she and her siblings often spent their time outdoors, assisting him in maintaining the farm. At school, Céline was an active student, excelling in sports and forming strong friendships. When she was 14, her parents took her on a trip to Britain, a place she immediately fell in love with. From that moment on, she dreamed of one day making it her home. Motivated by her cousin, who worked as a hotel manager in the UK, Celine chose to pursue an education that would prepare her for a career in the hospitality industry. After completing school, she enrolled in a local university to study accounting while continuing to visit her cousin in England whenever she had the chance. One summer, he helped her secure a job at a hotel, allowing her to gain hands-on experience before eventually returning home. In late 1995, at the age of 19, Celine made plans to visit Britain once again for the Christmas holiday. During that time, public train services in France were facing disruptions, prompting her parents to seek alternative travel arrangements. They reached out to a family friend, a truck driver, who agreed to give Celine a ride to Folkestone while delivering cargo to England. From there, she intended to continue her journey to Fordingbridge, a town approximately 150 miles, 250 kilometers away, where her cousin lived. On December 18th, Celine set off, expecting to reach her cousin's hotel by the evening. Her parents waited for her call to confirm she had arrived safely. But as the night wore on, there was no word from her. Without a mobile phone, Celine's family had no way to contact her and could only wait, hoping she would eventually arrive at the hotel. That night, they finally received a call, but it wasn't from Celine. Instead, it was her cousin, who informed them that she still hadn't shown up and asked if her plans had changed. Growing increasingly anxious, her parents, left with no other options, decided to reach out to the police. French authorities immediately contacted their British counterparts, who wasted no time in launching a search for the missing young woman. The first step in the investigation was speaking with Celine's parents, who traveled to England to assist with the case. They informed the police about the family friend, a truck driver, who had offered Celine a ride to the UK. Investigators managed to track him down, and he confirmed that he had dropped her off in Folkestone before heading in a different direction. While at the truck stop, he had encountered another French trucker who was traveling to Newbury, a town roughly an hour's drive from Celine's cousin's hotel. The second driver agreed to give Celine a ride, and investigators were able to track him down as well. He informed the police that he had dropped her off at a truck stop in Newbury. While there, she attempted to use a payphone to contact her cousin and arrange for a pickup, but for some unknown reason, she was unable to get through. By that point, it was already 4:30 p.m. The driver suggested that she take a train to her cousin's town, but there was a complication. The nearest train station was several dozen miles away, and he couldn't drive her there since his delivery route took him in a different direction. Wanting to assist her, he began asking other truckers in the parking lot if anyone could offer Celine a ride. The first trucker he approached declined, explaining that he planned to rest before continuing his journey. However, the second trucker agreed, mentioning that he was heading to Salisbury, which was only about a 30-minute drive from Celine's cousin's town. He even mentioned she could probably catch an 8 p.m. bus from there. With no other options left, Celine went with the third driver, and that's where her trail disappeared. Detectives tried to track this man down, but they didn't have enough solid information to identify him. The second driver, who had handed her over, couldn't recall the license plate number and only remembered that the truck was a white Mercedes. He also provided a description of the man. He was around 35 years old, had short blonde hair and a beard. The second driver also mentioned that something about this man struck him as suspicious. There was something unsettling about his behavior, but he still let Celine go with him because, at that point, she simply had no other choice. Police began to suspect that the third driver might have been involved in Celine's disappearance. Using the witness's description, they created a composite sketch and shared it with the local media. As for the first two drivers, investigators thoroughly checked their alibis and found solid evidence proving they had been in other locations at the time. Detectives soon uncovered a troubling detail that made them even more suspicious of the third driver. Remember how he told Celine she could catch an evening bus to her cousin's town from Salisbury? Well, it turned out that no such bus existed. Investigators wasted no time getting the word out about they shared her story, along with the suspect's composite sketch, through newspapers and TV. The case quickly grabbed national attention in both Britain and France. It was just days before Christmas, and the disappearance of a young woman during the holiday season struck a chord with the public. On top of that, there were fears that Celine might have fallen victim to a serial killer. Over the past 2 years, several young women had been murdered in the same area. Police believed these cases were linked to a single perpetrator, and now they were worried Celine's disappearance could be connected to him. As a result, the local police launched a full-scale search. Over 100 officers were assigned to the case, along with helicopters and even an airplane to scan the area from above. They concentrated their efforts along the route the third driver was believed to have taken with Celine, but despite all their efforts, they found no trace of her. Unfortunately, the first week of the search yielded no results. Both the police and Celine's family made numerous public appeals, urging anyone who might know something about her whereabouts or the driver himself to come forward. But every lead they followed quickly turned into a dead end. This went on for over a week, until the morning of December 29th, when police received a chilling call. A man driving near the town of Worcester had pulled over to adjust his windshield wipers. While walking along the roadside, he noticed something odd partially covered by snow. Curious, he went closer and, to his horror, realized it was a human body. Shaken, he immediately rushed home and called the police. Officers arrived at the scene and found the body of a young woman, but at first, they couldn't identify her. Initially, they thought it might be the remains of a local woman who had disappeared after leaving a nightclub, but the theory was quickly ruled out. It wasn't until the following day, December 30th, that police confirmed the body was Celine's. Her cousin was brought in to identify her, sparing her parents the heartbreaking task of doing it themselves. Police quickly noticed one important detail. The highway where Celine's body was found was almost in the opposite direction of where she had been heading. This only strengthened their theory that the truck driver who had given her a ride was likely responsible for her murder. All of Celine's clothing and personal belongings were missing, and officers found no trace of them near the site where her body was discovered. The autopsy revealed multiple bruises and abrasions consistent with heavy blows, as well as evidence of strangulation. Medical examiners also found signs of SA on Celine's body, but there was no biological material that could lead them to the perpetrator. One chilling detail stood out. The examiners determined that Celine's body had likely been left by the roadside only about 24 hours before it was found. With 11 days having passed since her disappearance, detectives speculated that the killer may have kept her alive for most of that time or even transported her body with him. The second driver who had helped Celine mentioned that the suspect's truck was equipped with an industrial freezer, which suggested the killer could have preserved her body at low temperatures for days. Despite all this, the police still had no solid leads on the driver's identity. However, a conversation with Celine's parents revealed an intriguing detail. She had been carrying 2 bottles of champagne as Christmas gifts. These, along with all her other belongings, were never found. It seemed likely that the killer had taken them, which gave investigators a potential new angle to explore. This champagne was a specific French brand that wasn't sold in Britain, making those 2 bottles completely unique in the country. Police decided to use this as leverage and sent information about the bottles to the media, along with photos of identical champagne. They hoped that the perpetrator might have shown them to someone or even shared them with friends or family. But unfortunately, this lead also went nowhere. Without any other leads in hand, investigators decided to take an unprecedented step. Despite the absence of the perpetrator's DNA on the victim's body, in early January of the following year, they initiated the first mass DNA collection in Britain's history. The police focused their efforts on drivers of Mercedes trucks and similar models. This process took over a month, and detectives managed to test more than 5,000 drivers. Most of them willingly provided their samples, but there were some who refused. Investigators put them on a separate list for further scrutiny, thinking that one of those individuals might be the killer. Meanwhile, Celine's case continued to gain widespread attention in both British and French media. The police received thousands of tips and leads, but unfortunately, none of them brought the detectives any closer to catching the killer. This continued until mid-February when one tip finally caught the investigators' attention. A man called the police after seeing the suspect's sketch on the news and said it looked strikingly similar to one of his co-workers. a 36-year-old truck driver named Stuart Little. He also mentioned that Stuart drove a Mercedes truck with a refrigeration unit. This lead prompted detectives to start digging into Stuart's background. The first thing they uncovered was Stuart's extensive criminal history, though it consisted of non-violent offenses. Next, they decided to approach him carefully and ask for a DNA sample, presenting it as a routine part of their investigation involving thousands of drivers across Britain. However, Stuart refused to provide a sample, which only deepened their suspicions. After several more attempts to persuade him, though, Stuart eventually gave in and agreed to the test. As soon as they had his DNA, the police secured a warrant to search his truck. That's when they found their first major evidence: traces of blood on the mattress in the sleeping area and in other parts of the cab. Testing confirmed it was Celine's blood, and that was enough for an arrest. The police also obtained a warrant to search Stuart's house. In his garage, they discovered Celine's personal belongings, the ones she had with her when she disappeared. But that wasn't all. Investigators noticed something odd about Stuart's tachograph, the device truck drivers are required to use by law to track their driving hours. It appeared that on the day Celine's body was dumped, Stuart had deliberately sealed information about his movements. However, he made a mistake. After disposing of the body, he resumed work without filling in the missing data. This created a suspicious gap in his driving log, which detectives believed corresponded to the time he transported Celine's body to the roadside. During his first interrogation, Stuart denied any involvement in the murder, claiming he had never even picked up Celine. But when police brought in the other driver, who identified Stuart in a lineup, his story changed. He now admitted to giving Celine a ride and claimed they had consensual intercourse. As for her belongings found in his garage, Stuart insisted she had simply forgotten them when he dropped her off. Naturally, investigators weren't quick to believe Stuart's story. They continued searching for evidence and soon found a witness who had seen him the day before Celine's body was discovered. The witness spotted Stuart near a warehouse about 50 miles from where the body was found. He was seen starting a fire next to his truck, and it appeared he was burning something. When police confronted Stuart about this, he claimed he'd started the fire to warm up his truck brakes, which had supposedly frozen due to the weather. Officers decided to search the area near the warehouse, and it didn't take long for them to find something disturbing. Underneath a fence, they discovered Celine's underwear. It was stained with her blood. Piecing together all the evidence, investigators came up with the most likely timeline of events. When Stuart picked up Celine, he drove to a secluded area where he assaulted and killed her. Based on the blood evidence found in his truck, they believe Stuart kept her body on the lower bunk in his cab for 10 days while continuing to make deliveries as if nothing had happened. Shockingly, just a week after the murder, Stuart went home to celebrate Christmas with his wife and children, while Celine's body remained just a few yards away in his truck. At some point, he decided to dispose of the body. Investigators found receipts showing Stuart had purchased a shovel, an axe, and a saw, likely with the intention of dismembering her remains. However, for some reason, he abandoned that plan and simply left her body near the roadside. Detectives soon uncovered another chilling detail. The day after Christmas, Stuart gave those 2 bottles of rare French champagne to an acquaintance as a gift. When detectives questioned him about it, Stuart claimed he bought the bottles from another French truck driver, but investigators didn't believe a word of it. On top of that, they uncovered another intriguing detail. Stuart had always worn a beard, but he completely shaved it off after the murder, right around the time the suspect sketch started appearing in the news. They also figured out why Celine couldn't reach her cousin when she tried to call him from a payphone. It turned out that the UK had recently changed its phone codes, and Celine had his number written down with the old code in her notebook. Unaware of this update, she dialed the outdated number, and her call never went through. For Stuart's family, friends, and co-workers, these revelations were a complete shock. To them, he had always seemed like a devoted family man and a reliable friend. At first, many even refused to believe he could have been involved. But as the media revealed the mounting evidence against him, they had no choice but to face the horrifying truth of who Stuart really was. Stuart's trial began in October of that year, and despite the mountain of evidence against him, He stuck to his story, denying everything. But the jury didn't need long to deliberate. They unanimously found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving at least 20 years. Soon after his sentencing, Stewart tried to appeal the verdict, claiming that the high-profile nature of the case had biased the jury, preventing him from receiving a fair trial. However, the appeals court rejected his claims. In February 2006, Stewart made another attempt to have his sentence reviewed, but once again, his appeal was denied. 10 years later, in February 2016, Stewart became eligible for parole, but his request was denied. The reason was clear. Even after spending 2 decades in prison, he still refused to admit to the crime and maintained his innocence. The judge also expressed concerns that Stewart continues to pose a threat to society. At present, he remains incarcerated, with little possibility of release in the near future. It is worth noting that Stewart was ultimately ruled out as a suspect in the other murders previously mentioned. Those crimes were later attributed to a different truck driver, who was apprehended in late 1997. Although prosecutors officially linked him to only 2 murders, they suspect he may be responsible for several other unsolved cases. Regarding Stewart, investigators also theorized that Celine might not have been his only victim. However, despite the passage of time, no concrete evidence has surfaced to tie him to any additional crimes. Feel free to share your thoughts on this case in the comments section. Moving on to the next case. Disappearance of Lori Jean Lloyd. Many iconic horror films from the 1980s and 1990s, which helped shape the genre, feature a recurring trope where a babysitter is alone at home and becomes the target of a threat. While these stories are purely fictional, numerous real-life mysteries suggest that such scenarios are not entirely far-fetched. One such case involves Lori Jean Lloyd, the youngest of 5 siblings. Her older sister, Joni, remembers Lori's love for animals, school, and running. However, as she entered her teenage years, her life took a darker turn. She began running away from home, leading to a point where she and her entire family sought counseling together. Lori confided that, as the youngest in the family, she often felt ignored and believed she wasn't receiving enough attention. Although things seemed to improve after counseling, they were far from perfect. In the months before her disappearance, Lori reportedly experimented with drugs, attempted to end her own life, and moved in with Joni after their mother refused to let her paint her bedroom walls black. Despite these struggles, when she went missing in 1976, her family recalled that she had been in good spirits, was doing well in school, and hadn't run away in months. On the night of February 11th, 14-year-old Lori was babysitting her 3-year-old nephew along with a friend at her home in Kettering, Ohio. Her mother, Anita Smith, stopped by to drop off pizza for them and noticed nothing unusual in the house before leaving. However, when Anita returned after midnight, Lori was nowhere to be found. Her friend and nephew were still inside, fast asleep, unaware that Lori had disappeared. Anita woke Lori's friend, who told her that Lori had gone to a nearby 7-Eleven, just 3 blocks away on Annabelle Drive, to buy cigarettes around 11 p.m. The trip should have taken no more than 15 minutes each way. However, when Anita arrived at the convenience store at 3613 Wilmington Pike, employees said they had not seen anyone matching Lori's description that night. Desperate to find her daughter, Anita drove around Kettering searching for any sign of Lori, but there was no trace of her. While a backpack had gone missing from the family home, Lori's belongings still remained. She had left behind her clothing, her private phone book, her Bible, and her handbag. Her bank account was left untouched. There have been few leads in Lori's case over the years. Her family feel that the initial investigation was hampered because the teenager was a known runaway. This is something we often hear on this channel, that the police do not act quick enough when a child has vanished if they have a history of running away. Loved ones have also pointed out that when Lori would take off, she always stayed with friends and called home to check in with her siblings and mother. One of Lori's friends told the police that the teenager planned to meet a boy that night who said he could take her to California. Lori was born in Fontana, California, and her estranged father lived in the States, but he had barely kept in touch with his 5 children since leaving. so family members found it odd that she would go and seek him out. If this boy ever existed, he has never been identified. For years after she vanished, Lori's family traveled to California. They had seen a documentary about the drug angel dust and noticed an extra in the background of one of the shots that resembled Lori. The scene the extra appeared in was filmed in a Santa Monica drug rehabilitation center. The producers of the movie attempted to identify the girl, but found that she had not signed a release before filming. She has never been identified or located, and it is unknown if this girl was Lori. The filmmakers, Dave Bell Associates, became interested in the teenager's case after speaking with her family. They decided to create a documentary about missing and runaway youths in a film titled Whatever Happens to Lori Jean Lloyd, which they released in 1981. Although it was shown in 88 cities across the U.S., no useful leads were uncovered. In February 2004, the DOE network reportedly listed Lori as having returned home safe. Her siblings were surprised by the change in case status and contacted the agency, who told them Detective Wolf, spelled WOLFE or occasionally WOOLF from Kettering PD, had been in touch with them to let them know Lori was no longer missing and endangered. This seems to have been caused by poor communication and misinformation, as the teenager has never been seen nor located since she went missing. The most recent update in Lori's case came in February 2016, when family members who run the Lori Jean Lloyd Facebook page announced that her dental records matched a Jane Doe who was discovered on April 17, 1976 in Grant County, Kentucky. She had died just days before her nude body was located. Listed on the DOE network site as 930 UFKY, Jane Doe is described as being between the ages of 13 and 15. Although she was originally thought to be between the ages of 20 and 30, 5'2" and white with light brown long hair. Shorts presumed to have belonged to her were found near the body. According to Lori's family, a detective with the Kettering Police Department had a dentist friend of his look at Lori's dentals and Jane Doe's and believed them to be a match. Despite this apparent confirmation, both case files are still up on several agency websites, and Lori's case has not been listed anywhere as resolved. No news agency has covered the story, and authorities do not appear to have formally announced the supposed match. A DNA match cannot be confirmed because Jane Doe's remains have been lost somewhere in Pottersfield, buried among numerous other unmarked graves. Adding to the confusion, some sources, including the unidentified wiki, claimed that Jane Doe was mistakenly identified as Lori and that DNA evidence has ruled them out as the same person. In a comment dated May 8, 2022, Lori's family stated that they planned to investigate these claims further. Lori was 14 years old when she disappeared from Kettering, Ohio, on February 11, 1976, after leaving her home on Annabelle Drive to walk to a convenience store on Wilmington Pike. She is described as a white female with long brown hair and brown eyes. At the time she went missing, she was approximately 5 feet tall and weighed between 102 and 110 pounds. She had a noticeable gap between her 2 front teeth and scars on her wrists from a previous suicide attempt. Her ears were pierced, and she was last seen wearing a sweater and jeans, possibly along with a t-shirt and jacket. If she is still alive today, she would be 59 years old. Anyone with information about is encouraged to contact the Kettering Police Department at 937-296-2555. Moving on to the next case. Tina Fales murder case. In April 1984, Tina Fales was making her way home from school in Pleasanton, California. But tragedy struck, and her family never saw her again. Nearly 3 decades would pass before DNA evidence provided a breakthrough in the case. On April 5, 1984, Tina chose to walk home from Foothill High School instead of taking the bus, as she had been dealing with bullying from other students. The 14-year-old decided to take a shortcut to her home in the Valley Trails neighborhood. Sadly, she never made it. Her body was later discovered in a drainage culvert near Highway 680, having suffered 44 stab wounds from a kitchen knife. Despite extensive efforts from law enforcement, no strong suspects emerged, and the case eventually went cold. It wasn't until February 2011 that investigators finally caught a break when DNA evidence from the crime scene linked to a man already in prison, Stephen Carlson. At the time of the crime, Carlson had been 16 years old and a fellow student at Foothill High School. He was convicted in February 2014 but continued to insist he was innocent. Initially, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 26 years to life. However, in February 2017, the First District Court of Appeal in San Francisco reduced his conviction to second-degree murder, cutting 10 years from his sentence. Finally, in 2020, as he approached his first parole hearing, Carlson wrote 3 letters admitting guilt. Of the 3 letters, one is a 9-page insight statement written for state parole commissioners. One is to Tina's family, and one is to his victim, Tina. One of the letters said, "I want you to know you and your family did absolutely nothing to deserve what I did to you." The letter went on explaining that he was acting out of drunken rage from having been bullied as well at school after he attempted to throw a party at his house while his parents were out of town. Carlson said that he did not plan to commit slaying that day, but was overcome when he saw Tina walking home from school in the field across the street from his house. In the letter, he admits to stabbing his younger classmate with a kitchen knife 44 times. Carlson wrote, "I remember being full of rage at the way all my classmates were laughing at me and the damage my parents' room was in, and how my dad was going to whip up on me after they found out about the party I threw. Everything happened so fast. I remember going to the kitchen and grabbed a butcher knife. I walked across the street into the field at the gully where Tina was." He also wrote, "You were just minding your own business. Having to walk home by yourself and have to walk through that scary drainage tunnel could have also been terrifying to a 14-year-old girl. But only to be horrifically surprised by me attacking and brutally stabbing you." Carlson said that he does not remember the stabbing motions. He just remembers standing over her bloody body holding a bloody knife. According to Joshua Sukhan, a multimedia journalist, Carlson got bullied, but he was also a major bully himself. Joshua also attended Foothill High School shortly after the slaying. He said that the kids in the area always suspected the boy they called Creepy Carlson as the suspect. They were not surprised when he was finally arrested. Joshua and Drew, Tina's brother, both wondered why Carlson confessed after 36 years. Joshua said there is a number of reasons why he penned these letters. It might be because he wants to get released earlier and wants to suck up to the parole board. It might be that he is maybe trying to clear his conscience. I am not going to pretend like I know. After writing the letters, Carlson canceled his own parole hearing. No one is sure why, but Drew believes it is all part of a plan to influence future attempts at release. Drew said, "Definitely a strategy. There is no remorse. None at all. If that were truly the case, he could have confessed in the courtroom." Drew said. Instead, he waited until his parole hearing to reveal the truth. Why did he wait 5.5 years? While Drew is relieved to finally know who is responsible for his sister's horrific murder, he admits that it doesn't bring closure. Reflecting on that painful time, he shared, "I remember that day like it was yesterday. My mom would sit outside my bedroom door so I could fall asleep. I was just 8 years old and we didn't know who had done it. I didn't know if I was next." Stephen Carlson remains incarcerated at the California Correctional Institution in Tehachapi as he awaits his next parole hearing. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Ferget. That evening at 10:44 p.m., a woman checked into the hotel. She was assigned room 2805 and booked it for a 3-night stay. During check-in, she provided the following details. Her name, Jennifer Ferget, and her date of birth, August 23, 1973, indicating she was 21 years old. She also listed her address as Verlaine, Belgium, along with a phone number and the name of a company. Additionally, Jennifer registered a man named Louis Ferget, though the receptionist never saw him. However, another employee later spotted her with a man estimated to be between 25 and 40 years old. It was reported that this man entered the room with her. Strangely, Jennifer was absent from her hotel room for the next 2 days. During her stay, she attempted to call 2 invalid phone numbers in Belgium. For days after she checked in, hotel staff realized that she had never provided any payment details. They sent notifications to her room through the hotel's television system, informing her that she had exceeded her credit limit and needed to settle her bill. The final message was acknowledged by someone in the room, who clicked OK on the TV remote, yet no one ever came down to pay. A housekeeper was asked if she had been in Jennifer's room in the last few days. The housekeeper has not, since there was a red "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. A hotel employee then finally went to knock on her door. Immediately after knocking, the employee heard a massive bang coming from the room. It was a gunshot. Fearing for his life, the employee went down the elevator to the security room. He told security what he had heard. The head of security went to Jennifer's room. This was now 15 minutes after the shot was heard. 15 minutes. The door of the room was unsupervised. He found that a door was locked both on the inside and the outside. After finally unlocking the door, he entered the room. An awful smell was detected. The man then saw the body of Jennifer on the bed. She had been shot. The gun was still in her hand. The police arrived on the scene 50 minutes after the gunshot was heard. With the door being locked from the inside as well as the outside, it would mean that Jennifer had to be alone in the room. This caused the police to believe she took her own life. There were some strange details over. The gun was held upside down. Her thumb was on a trigger. No blood or gunshot residue was found on her hand. 2 gunshots were fired, one into a pillow and one into her forehead. All of the labels from her clothing had been removed. The serial number on the gun was also removed and was apparently done very professionally. The police did later manage to track down the factory where it was made, but that never really led them anywhere since they did not know where it was sold or to who. Strangely enough, there were no fingerprints on a gun, which cast more doubt on if the woman did first to herself. It was soon discovered that all of the information she gave when checking in was fake. No Jennifer or Lewis Brigade existed. The address she gave also did not exist. If she did take her own life, why would she go through such great lengths to conceal her identity? An autopsy concluded as she was between 25 and 35 years old, not 21 as she claimed. The police questioned everyone that stayed on the same floor as the woman, and by questioning, I mean they just asked if anyone heard or saw anything out of the ordinary. A man who was also from Belgium left opposite Jennifer in room 2804. We know that he was a businessman, and he's referred to as Mr. F. He told investigators that when he checked out, he was asked if he saw or heard anything out of the ordinary regarding the woman. But this was a lie, however. The man checked out the day before the woman's body was found. It is unknown why he would lie about this fact. It's unclear whether the police ever conducted a thorough investigation into him. Inside the hotel room, a bottle of Maine's cologne was discovered, along with a magazine that had a different room number written on it. A single fingerprint was found on the magazine. Surprisingly, it did not belong to Jennifer and was the only identifiable print in the entire room. Other items in the room included a half-eaten plate of food and a few pieces of clothing. Strangely, some of the clothes she had been seen wearing were missing, and their whereabouts remain unknown. The woman had short dark hair and blue eyes, with gold and porcelain dental work. A DNA analysis later confirmed that she was originally from northern Germany. Several hotel employees recalled that she spoke fluent English and German. Many theories suggest that she may have been a spy, but no concrete evidence has ever supported this claim. To this day, her true identity and the mystery of what really happened to her remains unsolved. Case title: The Murder of John Mike Wrights. John Mike Wrights, a 48-year-old resident of Lewis and Clark County, Montana, went missing in February. Later that year, in October, his remains were discovered inside plastic bags on the eastern side of McDonald Pass. An autopsy determined that he had been shot twice in the back of the head. Investigators learned that John had ongoing disputes with multiple neighbors before his death. Authorities questioned all of his neighbors but struggled to uncover any substantial leads identifying the perpetrator. However, one individual stood out to investigators, Leon Michael Ford. As one of John's neighbors, Leon frequently argued with him over restricted access to his property due to John's actions. Surveillance footage from a game camera, owned by another neighbor, captured Leon's vehicle on John's property on June 25, 2011. Leon told police that they had reached an agreement regarding the access. It was just a few days later, on the June 28, that John disappeared. Investigators were highly suspicious of Leon, but they could not prove that he was involved with John's life being taken. They did not give up, however, and continued their investigation. Investigators found cable ties at all of the locations that John's remains were found. A specific type of material was last manufactured in February, and investigators were informed that these ties were only distributed to select vendors. During their inquiry, they discovered records from a contractor at a naval air station on the island where Leon worked. Evidence showed that Leon had taken some of these ties from a warehouse, yet there was no record indicating what project they were intended for. Additionally, a review of case files revealed that Leon had provided false information regarding several details during his time in Chile. Authorities also assert that they have definitive proof linking Leon to John's murder, as well as evidence tampering. However, the specifics of this evidence have not yet been disclosed to the public. In September 2020, Leon was apprehended in Washington and subsequently transferred to Montana. His court hearing is scheduled for early 2021. Moving on to the next case. Sonia Carmen Harakesten. In 1981, Sonia was a 30-year-old single mother living with her 4-year-old daughter in Monterey County, California. She worked as a merchandiser and sales representative for Levi Strauss & Company. On October 15, 1981, Sonia's friend, Caroline McBride, arrived at her home and knocked on the door. When there was no response, McBride let herself in. Inside, she made a shocking discovery. Sonia's partially clothed body was sprawled on the living room floor. She had been strangled using a pair of pantyhose. Investigators collected several pieces of DNA evidence from the crime scene, preserving them for future analysis. To piece together what had happened, authorities constructed a timeline of the crime. They concluded that Sonia had likely been killed while her young daughter was at school. Her body was discovered around noon. Soon after the crime took place, a man told investigators that he had a friend who admitted to being inside Sonia's house the morning that her life was taken. The friend's name is Michael Glazebrook, Sonia's neighbor. A day after the crime occurred, investigators decided to interview him. They saw that he had a scratch on his face and was extremely nervous. On December 18th of 1981, he was arrested in connection to the case. In 1983, he was tried, but the jury could not agree on his innocence or guilt. Prosecutors dropped the case following a mistrial. In the early 1980s, DNA evidence was a long way off. Blood was found under Sonia's fingernails, but lab technicians could only tell that it did not belong to her. In February 2020, investigators decided to re-examine the case. The DNA evidence in 1981 was re-examined using modern forensic techniques, allowing investigators to develop a complete DNA profile. Still convinced that Michael Glazebrook was involved, authorities obtained a DNA sample from him. After further testing, it was officially confirmed that Glazebrook was responsible for Sonia's murder. In February, 65-year-old Glazebrook was arrested at his home in Seaside, California. Disturbingly, he had been working as a school bus driver. He was booked into the Monterey County Jail, where he was held on a $1 million bail. Glazebrook was convicted of the crime in February, and his sentencing is scheduled for April 26. He faces a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Moving on to the next case. Mary Maroney. Born on May 9, 1928, was the joy of her parents' lives. Michael and Catherine Maroney married at a young age. Catherine was only 13. By the time she reached 17, they had 2 daughters, 2-year-old Mary and 11-year-old Anastasia. Residing at 5200 Wentworth Avenue in Chicago, Illinois, the family struggled with poverty. Michael earned approximately $15 a week, which is equivalent to about $224 today. A relative of Catherine's reached out to the Needy Family Services, a newspaper column where individuals could request financial aid. Typically, the column did not publish home addresses, but due to an error, the couple's address was exposed. This mistake caught the attention of a woman who saw an opportunity to take advantage of the situation. On May 14, 1930, an unidentified woman arrived at their doorstep. There are 2 commonly reported versions of what the woman told Catherine. In one, she claimed to be a social worker sent to assess their situation, while in the other, she stated that she was acting on behalf of a social worker named Mrs. Henderson. Witnesses described her as a well-dressed young woman, approximately 22 years old, with prominent teeth and a refined manner of speaking. She introduced herself as Julia Otis and even provided the couple with some basic groceries at no cost. After hearing about their struggles, Julia proposed taking Mary with her to California for a short period. She assured them that upon her return, Mary would be transformed and, in her words, fat as a butterball. However, Catherine rejected the idea. Before leaving, Julia gave the couple 12 and promised to return. True to her word, she showed up again the next day. This time, she had baby clothes as Catherine was 7 months pregnant with the couple's 3rd child. The young woman said she'd arranged for Michael to get a better job and this time offered to take Mary shopping for clothes and shoes at a nearby store. Eventually, Catherine agreed. Mary reportedly cried and refused to go, but was taken anyway. Neither Mary nor Julia Otis ever came back. The next day, the Marones received a letter from the mysterious woman. It read as follows: "Please don't be alarmed. I have taken your little girl to California with me. I have hired a special nurse to care for her. We'll be back in 2 months. By that time, you will be on your feet again and will be able to care for her. She didn't even cry a bit. She's outfitted like a princess. In the meantime, I'll help all I can to get you on your feet. Don't worry about her or anything else. When you get this letter, we'll be on our way already. As ever, Julia Otis." The letter was written on stationery from a Chicago store, and witnesses believe they saw Julia with Mary as she dictated the notes to a store employee. She also apparently paid for Mary's clothing with a $50 note, which was a lot of money during this time period. This has led to much online speculation that she was a member of a black market adoption ring. The letter did not help put the couple at ease. And despite the promises that Julia made, Michael and Catherine never saw their eldest daughter again. This was also the last time Julia ever contacted the family, and she did nothing to provide them with further aid. 2 weeks later, a woman named Alice Henderson sent a letter to the couple claiming that Julia was her cousin and she was love-hungry from losing her husband and baby the year before. She added that their baby would be returned to them safe and sound. However, as with Julia, Alice was never heard from again. Authorities noted that both of the letter writers shared the same handwriting. Leads in the investigation were sparse. In July of 1931, an elderly Native American woman named Martha Thompson was found pushing a cart which contained a blonde-haired, blue-eyed 3-year-old girl matching Mary's description. Martha claimed that the girl was abandoned by her mother, a woman named Florence Fuller, and begged to be allowed to keep her. At first, investigators were hopeful, but the Maroneys ultimately did not recognize the young girl as their missing daughter. Then, in 1952, a 24-year-old housewife from California came forward, believing she might be the lost Maroney child after her husband noticed striking similarities. Mary McKellen had been adopted by Charles and Nova Beck in 1930. She shared similar dental features, body and skull measurements, blood type, and prints with the Maroneys. However, she lacked a scar from a childhood operation that Mary had undergone. The highly publicized reunion between Mary McKellen and the Maroney family raised hopes of a resolution. Catherine and Michael accepted her as their daughter, but DNA testing after her death in February 2005 confirmed she was not Mary Maroney. Following their daughter's disappearance, Michael and Catherine had 6 more children, 1 daughter and 5 sons. But the loss of their firstborn left a void that could never truly be filled. It has now been 90 years since Mary Maroney vanished, and her fate remains a mystery. While a resolution seems unlikely, we can still hope that one day, even the smallest piece of evidence will emerge to finally reveal what happened to her. Moving on to the next case. Lila Portress. According to the FBI's National Crime Information Center, by December 2019, there were over 87,000 active missing persons cases, and uniform crime reports indicated that the United States had approximately 250,000 unsolved murders as of February 2019. This number increases by about 6,000 each year. Given these staggering figures, it is disheartening to realize that attention is often focused on only a select group of cold cases, when in reality, no case should be overlooked. Every case deserves attention, but unfortunately, many are forgotten. One such case is that of Lila Portress. The story of 28-year-old Lila Portress began on June 27, 1977, when she was last seen at her home on Cynthia Avenue in Tiverton, Rhode Island. Employed at an insurance company in Fall River, Massachusetts, Lila failed to show up for work for several days, and her car remained parked in her driveway for an unusually long time. On June 29th, a concerned neighbor asked Lila's husband to check on her. The front door was locked, but notably, the porch light was on, even though it was midday. Still worried about her safety, the neighbors called the local police department. Inside the house, Lila's TV and all of the lights were on, and her pet cats appeared to be left alone. Police discovered her purse, ID, glasses, and contact lenses, leading them to suspect that she may have fallen victim to foul play. There were no signs of a struggle, prompting investigators to theorize that Lila may have left with someone she knew, planning to return later. The only item missing from the house was a set of spare keys. Weeks later, on July 13, 1977, workers discovered Lila's body in a wooded area near William S. Kenning Boulevard in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her body was found in thick underbrush about 40 feet from the road, just 3 miles from her home. Lila had been shot to death with a small caliber weapon, commonly used in hits or execution-style killings. Authorities concluded that she had been killed elsewhere and then disposed of in the woods. Lila was found fully clothed, but it could not be determined whether or not she was sexually assaulted due to the state of decomposition. The spare set of keys which were missing from the home were found on her person. When the case went public, a neighbor came forward to state that they heard screams emanating from her house at around 3 a.m. on the night of the 27th. Investigators also discovered that the last person to see her alive was her boyfriend, who claimed that he'd left the house at around 12 a.m. that night. Over the next year, the police and FBI followed up hundreds of leads and interviewed over 100 people. Several persons of interest were identified, but no one was ever charged in relation to Lila's slaying. Given that her case receives tragically little media coverage, there isn't much known about the investigation following her demise nor her background. What we do know for certain is that Lila moved to Rhode Island in 1972 after marrying a man named William J. Souza. The couple bought a house together but divorced 3 years later. At the time of her passing, Lila had plans to take time off work and head to her home state of Maine where her father still lived working as an engineer. There are numerous theories circulating about Lila's case, although most of them remain unproven. Local rumors among her co-workers suggested that she may have been having an affair with a police officer, but it's unclear whether any officers were questioned in connection with the case or if there's any truth to this claim. Some have speculated that Lila might have discovered something suspicious at her job, while others have noted the way her execution appeared to be methodical, combined with the small caliber weapon, leading many to wonder if she was the target of a hit. However, Lila was known to be an extrovert with many friends and a love for stray animals, making it seem unlikely that she would have gotten involved in criminal activity, though it's still a possibility. In 2019, Lila's case was featured on a set of cold case playing cards distributed to prisons across the country. Now more than 4 decades old, her case remains unsolved, though detectives working on it say they are getting closer to finding an answer. Anyone with information regarding Lila's case is urged to contact the Tiverton Police Department at 401-625-6717. Moving on to the next case.